All right, today I'm talking to Katherine Krupka. We met at a conference in 2018. It was Rick Tamlin's Bigger Game conference, I believe. And there are so many things about Katherine that are fascinating to me that I don't even know where to start. So thanks for joining me today, Katherine.
It's a pleasure. I'm really excited.
When we met in 2018, I can still remember it. We were standing in the little dessert area of this happy hour thing. And I always force myself to go to those things for 15, 20 minutes. I have to show up and meet whoever's there. And then I can go back to my room and do my thing.
I'm the same way. So it was meant to be.
And so it was Katherine and this other lady named Lisa. I don't know. I can see her last name in my mind, but I don't know how to say it. Did you know her before, or did you?
No.
Okay. So we're standing there. Somehow we get to talking about stuff, and Katherine starts talking about her energy work, and I'm like, whoa, I don't know what this energy stuff is. This is she's talking about clearing this space where she shares with this other practitioner, and I'm like, oh, this is even weirder, but okay. And then somehow we start talking about meditation, and it was hilarious. So you're my first meditation teacher. so you and Lisa, we're talking about meditation, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm open to trying this. What would I do? And it was I still remember it. You were standing there, and you're like, okay, let me sense into this. And you're like, okay, 8 minutes. I think 8 minutes would be like, wow, this lady's I don't know what she's tuned into, but she's connected to something here. She's like, 8 minutes. I think 8 minutes. Yeah. I'm like, what about 10? You're like, well, 10 would be better, but 8. And I think you said 2 times a day. And I don't know, the rest was history. I ended up doing it for, I don't know, some unbroken streak of time. So that's the longest intro ever as to how I met you. But tell people, who's Katherine? What's Katherine up to in the world?
Well, that's a tough question. I do work with people doing variety of what might be called energy work and coaching together. And I always sort of joke that there are 3 of us in the session. There's me, there's the client, and there's their highest wisdom, their all-knowing self. And one of the things we really do in our work together is go through all the stuff we get to do to really get them a nice, solid connection to that higher wisdom. And I'll play with it also and help them really live from there, right? Where, the normal thinking stuff and all the stuff we do is, of course, always there. But to get greater access, a greater sense of identification, and therefore default mode, right, at that wiser, higher, whatever word you want to use, level, that point of access. And then we're creating from there, right? And, I come from the corporate world and diplomacy and the corporate world. And, I got into all this stuff for my own healing, honestly, right? I, hit rock bottom myself, which is how most people get into this kind of work, right? Is we have our own crisis. And so I really sort of hid it, it's like, oh, look, I'm just an executive coach. Oh, look, I'm a naturopath. Oh, look, I teach some yoga. Oh yeah, I do some meditation. But I kept it hidden for a very long time. I mean, I still do, honestly. Actually, just to be completely honest, I still sort of, right? I'm sort of coming out as woo here on this podcast. And because it's easy to think, oh, all these people in my previous world, all the, business executives, the government leaders, all these sort of people would think I'm just a nutcase, right? I would not be taken seriously. I couldn't get a meeting with anybody. No one would want to speak to me. But what I'm finding partly on my own, but even more through other people. A woman I know does intuition training, and she's working with CEOs. She's like out there. And I think people are getting that this is like a new cutting edge, right? Like in the 80s, it was exercise and you'll do better, you'll perform better in your work. Remember that, right? It was just sort of coming into conscious, like exercise would actually help your business or help your performance. And then it was like, oh, if you eat the right foods, oh, if you do this, if you do this. And I think we're at the point finally where people are recognizing that that next frontier, I don't know if you want to call it that, is the inner. It's the inner stuff that we get to play with, and the vast resources that exist for us when we tap deeper internally rather than looking externally.
Now you're also an interfaith minister. Is that right?
Yes,
and
I
you
am.
Also run a couple of associations. So what else do you do that we don't know about?
So I get bored easily, which is why I like to keep different parts of my brain active and different parts of my system engaged in different things. I still keep a wee little toe in international consulting, business consulting work. I do run a professional association for healers and coaches. And I am an interfaith minister, but I mean, I'll do ceremonies, but that isn't my focus. My focus with that really is as we are tuning deeper internally, for a lot of people, that touches on the spiritual and can either bump up against old religious systems, right? The birth religion of origin type situation, against which a lot of people have rebelled at some point in their lives or been injured in some way through their lives. So there's a lot of repair and healing that gets to go on there in order for someone to access deeper spiritual potentials, clearer spirituality, not connected to religion necessarily, but that gets to happen in order for them to move forward spiritually. Or people recognize that they're on a spiritual path, and it can be very helpful to bring in some of their own tradition into our exploration or into the practices that we might use for them. When I was in seminary, actually, it was very interesting because I was raised Catholic and, like many, rebelled completely, and even was researching how can I leave the church? And I realized the only way you can leave is to join another church, which I had no interest in doing, or to be excommunicated, which is not easy to do. It's not easy to be excommunicated. So I thought, well, I wanted to leave, but I couldn't actually leave, which is kind of interesting, right? But if you're raised in something, and the Catholic Church is a perfect example because they're so focused on ritual and indoctrination and all of that, they've really got that down. If you wanted to learn how to do that, they'd be a great case study, actually. So I rebelled. I left, as many people do. And in seminary, someone was talking. One of our teachers was talking about how there's a great benefit in returning to your faith of origin. And we all just bristled, right? I mean, if you're going to become an interfaith minister, you're doing it because you're not interested in any specific church, or not, especially not the one you grew up in, right? Church or tradition, right? I mean, we have people of all faiths who are there. So I bristled, but I also got it, because that is already, it's in there. It's in our muscle memory. You can say it's in our DNA. It certainly is in our collective memory and those patterns that our system is working with. It's our parents, grandparents, great grandparents, et cetera, and it's the culture. And if you grew up in a community of faith, then it's just in the water that you were drinking. So no matter what the faith is, there is a benefit to going back to it and looking at it with fresh eyes. For me, that meant, I'm not interested in the institution of the church, but the teachings of the mystics are pretty amazing. I mean, there's a lot there, right? And the early teachings of the faith are very, very powerful. And I still don't consider myself Catholic, but there's an awful lot of richness there, right? When you, after you, I don't want to say, I don't know, I'm going to say mature, but I don't really like that word. You go beyond the place where it's like, I've got to throw everything out. I have to completely rebel. There's nothing of any value here to like, oh, wait, this is really cool. I don't need to interact with this, or I want to still protest against this, or whatever the case might be. But this has value. So we can go back to that piece of value. And I help a good number of people access that with their faith or bringing in new faiths. I was really introduced to the Vedic path when I first began my own spiritual, whatever you want to call it, path, seeking, quest, whatever word you want to use. And there was so much richness in that, and interesting ways that that marries or underpins, I mean, really at their base, the fundamental teachings of all of the big faiths are pretty much the same. They come at it in different ways. Some have more color, some have more ritual, some have more, whatever. Some make you kneel, some don't, whatever. Like they've got their little differences there, but the principles and the fundaments and even the deep practices, right? The more mystic practices are pretty much the same.
So that's so beautiful. So Catherine and I coached together, and as the coach, I was always focused on what's present here, where are we going, what's here now informs what's next. I think of all the people I've ever met with, you had the most, I don't want to call them throwaway, but they were always like, oh my gosh, I'd like to spend an hour knowing about that. So here are some of the things that I remember. We were at the embassy throwing darts at, I think it was in Russia, deciding where we were going to go for the weekend. I'm like, what was she doing? And then there was, oh yeah, sorry not to get back to you. I'm going to DC for the last rocket launch. And then something about trained in firearms. When I was managing director of, and I never did know what you were managing director of. Can you start us a little bit at the beginning? So like, what do you study in college? Like how does this all come together?
Yeah. So I was very interested in things international, right? And travel and exotic places and things like this. And I went to high school actually in Houston, which was actually moving from Chicago. It did feel a bit exotic, but not in a way that I appreciated at the time. Um, this is actually quite funny. I was on the debate team, and there was a woman on the squad there's always like an instigator, right? You've always got an instigator in a group, and she was our instigator. She was amazing. I love her. And she got her hands on a Russian English dictionary, like of swear words or something. I mean, something just so convoluted, right? So we sat around and taught ourselves all these foul words in Russian in high school. This is mid 80s in Houston. And then, of course, we'd go to debate tournaments and we'd toss these words around just to psych the other teams out, and they like debaters do, right? And so we thought we were really cool. As it turns out, by the way, no one really uses those words. They use them in very different and much more colorful ways. But we thought we were really cool. So then I got to university, and I need a language. I've studied French already. I live in Texas. Why would you pay money to learn Spanish? And so I took Russian because it was interesting. And it's the mid 80s, right? It's Gorbachev coming to power. It's glasnost. It's, perestroika, all of these things coming up. I mean, this is like the coolest thing in the world at the time. So I was really excited, and my international studies program basically turned into a Soviet studies program. And I studied the language. I also ended up studying archaeology, Mesoamerican archaeology along the way, which is where I thought I was going to go. I thought that was going to become my trajectory for the future. But an opportunity came up to apply to work at the embassy in Moscow. And that was, I mean, it was the be all end all, right? I was so excited. And it's interesting because there were several of us who said we were going to do it. So, like, we'll go as a band, right? We'll do this together. And I'm the only one who actually completed the application process. And which was lengthy because you needed a top secret clearance. You needed.
This is straight out of college.
Straight out of college. Mm-hmm. And so I went straight out of college
to Russia.
To the Soviet Union then. Yeah. Okay. It was 1989. And there I was. It was extraordinary. It was amazing. Everything was, I mean, the Berlin Wall was coming down, like everything. It was so amazing and so fascinating and so alive and such an extraordinary opportunity in so many ways. I mean, the number, there aren't words to describe the adventures that we had or the experiences that we were able to have that you never would, or even professionally a few years later, the opportunities that I had that, you know, you'd need to be in your 40s or 50s to be able to do here. But because we happened to be there and we knew certain things, you know, we were put in charge of stuff at an age far earlier than one would ever expect. So it was really, and that's where the throwing darts at the map, at the Marine bar at the embassy, we could fly for Soviet prices. So it cost nothing to go places. So literally we would blindfold ourselves and throw a dart at the map and see where we might go for the weekend. Or one time we picked a trip, a couple of friends and I, there was a city called Yaya, which was just interesting grammatically, because if you go there with a preposition, it's v'yayu. We are in v'yaye, right? So it's just interesting grammatically. So we thought, well, that'd be fun. Let's go to Yaya for a grammatical field trip. So when we had those, we just had those opportunities and many others. Women didn't tend to drive then there. And I don't know if I should say this. So I had the opportunity.
And upon further reflection, Katherine asked me to remove the section that came after this. So we did. Back to the conversation.
You would also get very special treatment. Going in and out of the Kremlin, we'd trade little gifts with the guards at the Kremlin, little chocolates, little, packs of cigarettes or little things like that. Yeah, I mean, nothing, untoward, nothing, any kind of security risk or anything like that, but just fun little things that were extraordinary experiences. To like zoom, you come up this hill and then you go down into the Kremlin and you go boom around. It's like you're flying into this magnificent structure. I don't know. It's an extraordinary experience. So yeah, so lots of fun with that.
How many years were you there?
At the embassy, 2.5, maybe 3 years. And then I joined a part of the World Bank called the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, which is their for-profit arm. And they were doing privatization at the provincial and municipal levels in the country, which was voluntary. So basically we were flying around pitching this idea of privatizing your trucking fleets and your retail stores and things like this to governors and mayors. And again, I mean, we're 20 somethings, running around and doing this. And it's never been done before. This had never been done before in the world. This was a whole new way of doing this. It was a scale that had never been even conceived before this. And here we are, running around and doing these amazing things. And it was an extraordinary experience also. So then, did that same kind of thing in different countries, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, in Ukraine, in Kyiv, some, but mostly in Odessa and Nikolaev, some of the most beautiful cities around, sadly. And so did that for many years. And then, went back to the States for by then I'm working with a private company, who's a little piece of, it's a global consulting company, and their little piece of their business is doing this kind of stuff. So then I got to work in a bunch of different countries through Eastern Africa, Uganda, Tanzania, did work in Pakistan, Bosnia Herzegovina, right at the end of the war, helping complete the last little bit of the Dayton Accords, and these amazing, amazing things. And then I got sent back to Russia to run the operations for that company in Russia. So we had multiple offices, a couple hundred people, and we were working for the oligarchs, one in particular. And
what does it mean that you're working for the oligarchs?
So one of the oligarchs was our client. He ran a very big company that became bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, it's actually funny because what I do now in some ways is actually, people think it's like night and day from what I used to do, and it isn't really.
How so?
There's a really clear line, because a lot of what we were doing there was, I didn't know it at the time myself, right? But you're operating from a higher vision. So here's this guy who everybody thought looked like a thug, sounded like a, thug, to use a polite word, and everyone thought he can't. I mean, he'll never be able to borrow money on the international markets. He'll never be able to merge, and it's. I mean, they came out of nowhere, right? This all happened so fast. These people became 100 millionaires, and in some cases billionaires, in a matter of, no time.
So you were helping them become legit? Like legit in the world?
Yes,
versus
legit in the
like
world.
helping them do evil things?
No, become legit in the world, right? So we worked with this guy to become legit in the world, right? And he became a darling of the West. Really, he did. And very smart man, obviously, very capable, and cleaner than most oligarchs. And and still out there fighting the good fight, by the way. Like he's still out there fighting the good fight, which I give him tremendous credit for. And helping build these companies and create international, partnerships and capital lines and things like this. So doing that, and then Western companies selling chocolate bars and things like that in Russia. So, and and more like World Bank kind of things, like revising, like helping develop a commercial legal system and helping develop an education program around commercial law, and helping even just introduce the idea of private ownership and why this is good and what's possible and all of this. So a lot of really huge public education, public communication work on a grand scale.
All because you learned to say curse words in Russian in high school.
In high school debate, yes. Right? I know, it's crazy. I think about the number of little things that had to occur and the number of little choice points that played. But if I trace it back to the very beginning, that's the beginning of it.
What do you think was what's your, I don't know, secret sauce, or like what is it that keeps, like, it sounds like something just kept kind of pulling you forward. You're saying yes, obviously, but you're also have some knack, I think. Like, how did you find this job to work for the ambassador? That seems like kind of a big deal.
I didn't work for the ambassador, right? I was at I heard about the opportunity to apply to work there. I heard about through a friend in Russian class.
Okay.
Who didn't end up applying. he was just the transmitter of the opportunity.
And you took it.
I leapt at it. And yeah, so I did all kinds of work there. So it was, it was entry level grunt work kind of things in a lot of ways. But, I got to go to all these receptions, meet these great artists, meet these famous poets, and these amazing things, occurred, and things were just possible. They were possible there. And at that time, and if you jumped at things, there was no limit. I know people who went over when I did, who literally are multi millionaires, retired, off on, totally different. Like they did it. They went all in, cashed out, did their thing. And I didn't go that route, right?
What did you do instead?
Well, honestly, instead, at the end, I mean, I loved what I was doing. I loved it. I loved every minute of it, except like at the very end. And it was heavy, right? This is a period, late 90s, early 2000s. Things were just crazy there. I mean, really crazy, lawless, wild east, type stuff. And, it was a very intense lifestyle, right? You're working 24/7, you're on call all the time. You're being listened to, not just by the government, but by your clients and by your clients' competitors pretty much all the time. Like we would just laugh. Like if you don't want it on the 6 o'clock news, don't say it.
So even in a private.
No, just, yeah. And especially, over the phone or anything like that. But even in private, I mean, we were switching from one client, working with one client to working with their competitor, doing it all totally above board by the contract. We were completely legit in how we were doing everything. But all of a sudden, my driver, who used to be a typesetter at Pravda, nice guy, not a rocket scientist, right? He starts asking me, this is in the oil sector, he starts asking me all these questions about exploration and, oil prices and, international. I'm like, hey, Victor, why is Victor, right? This isn't his thing.
He's changing careers.
He's right. So, I mean, these things happen. Someone hires your driver to report on you. So I was meeting up with someone from this other company, and we would meet, not at anyone's office or anything like that. We would meet, at a restaurant or a cafe or something like this. But we got to the point where we had this whole elaborate thing where he would get dropped off, send his driver away. I would get dropped off, send my driver to go run errands for me. And then he would get picked up separately. I would get picked up separately. So just all to try to keep things. But of course, everybody knew everything anyway, because everything. You were watched so carefully. It was hilarious. One, actually, my favorite story on that, we were doing a contract negotiation with an organization, and it was very tense. They didn't like us. They didn't really want to do this. They were kind of being forced to do this project. And I got so frustrated. I mean, I was so frustrated. This was taking forever. It was so intense. They were just intransigent on all these like niggling points that meant nothing, right? They were just being obstinate. And I got home one night and I was on the phone with a colleague, my boss actually in the States. And you know better, but every now and then you just slip. And I slipped and I said, if he weren't such a blah, blah, blah. And then as soon as I said it, I thought, oh. But then we move on, right? Move on. The conversation goes on. 2 days later, I go and sit down. He comes in with his, I've got my little crew of people. He's got his little crew of people, right? We sit across from each other at these big, long official tables it's all, the Russians love all this sort of, pomp and circumstance kind of stuff. So we're sitting there and we're getting to, I don't know, the first point or whatever. And he says, well, if I wasn't such a blah, 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 and verbatim, except in Russian, quotes what I said to my colleague.
Now, did they know that you knew Russian and they could understand him?
Yeah. So, but you work through an interpreter anyway, because it gives you more time to process things, and because you don't want to ever make a mistake. So even if you speak the language, it's better to work with an interpreter for things like that. So anyway, so he said that, and then I'm sitting there thinking, what do I do now, right? Because you can't lose. So I can't show him any kind of reaction. I can't show that I'm shocked or thrown off balance. So I just took a deep breath, took a sip of water, and I said, well, now that we've got that settled, let's move on.
Was your life ever in danger?
Next question.
Okay. So how does this all come to an end?
It comes to an end with me, honestly, suicidally depressed. And part of it, just the density of everything around. It was a very dark, dense time. And part of it, honestly, your body can only do that kind of stuff for so long. You know, it's, you know, I lived on junky food, caffeine, you know, sugar, alcohol, of course. You know, that's the way things were. And
How many years from the time that you,
like 10, basically.
and how many different countries in those 10 years?
Mostly Russia, but living 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5. But mostly 10 years in, 10 years basically in Russia.
But then you mentioned all those other countries.
Russia and former Soviet. So Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, that was 10 years. And then some other countries in other periods. Yeah. So it was difficult on the system. So depression took hold, and that was the transition point. So I was able to leave eventually, and it was not easy to find someone to fill that role. But I was able to leave eventually. And while I was there, maybe 6 months or so before I left, a colleague brought me a book by a fellow named Gabriel Cousens called Depression Free for Life. And he was all, I'd asked for other books, and he said it jumped off the shelf at him. And of course, he's like the person who that never happens to, right? He's not that person. So when he brought it to me, he said, I hope you're not offended. I hope this isn't upsetting, because no one knew how, what a difficult situation I was in. I was very good at hiding it. Very good. I read the whole thing in one night, of course, like with an entire bottle of wine and probably a pack of cigarettes. But, but I read the whole thing in one night, and it was all about raw foods and depression. And I thought, wow, there must be something to this. And I thought, I want to go here when I get to the States. So I did. Literally, I flew through Houston, dropped my cat off at my parents' house, and went straight to his place in Arizona. And there I learned to meditate.
This seems like a hard left turn, considering the lifestyle that you've been.
Talk about a left turn. In 24 hours, I became a raw food vegan. No alcohol, no caffeine, no stimulants, no sugar. Obviously, no cigarettes, no nothing. Like, poof, done. Like a off switch or an on switch, perhaps.
What did that do to your body?
I think my body was actually quite grateful.
It was like, thank you, finally.
I think rather than, like, you could think someone could have a big detox reaction or something like that. I think mine was so exhausted and so worn out and so grateful. It just said, finally. So I learned yoga. I learned meditation. I learned raw food lifestyle. I learned all these things. And this is on a magnificent sacred piece of land. And Gabriel Cousens himself is both a doctor and a rabbi and a deep spiritual teacher in both in the Jewish tradition and in the Vedic tradition.
What a combo.
Right? I know. It is an interesting combo. And so was my perfect teacher at that stage. So I'd stay there, I don't know how many weeks, 4 weeks. And then I went to Manhattan, where I was working at the same company, but at headquarters in Manhattan.
So you took 4 weeks off. You hadn't officially left.
I didn't leave the company, just left for a different position in the company. Yeah. So left there, took a, whatever, a leave or what have you. And did that, and then came back, and then went back out for a few more weeks. The folks in Manhattan didn't really know what to do with me. They sort of looked at me like I had 3 heads. Like, who's this woman? Where did she come from? Not realizing that we do the same things, just in far more difficult circumstances and in a pretty complex language. And with, honestly, higher stakes, higher stakes in some ways. So anyways, it was like a part-time job there. So I'm already, like, I left, his place was called the Tree of Life Rejuvenation Center. And I left there saying, I'm going to become a naturopath. And Gabriel basically did what you just did there, right? He sort of chuckled. He was very kind about it, but he, all but patted me on the head and said, that's nice. Not in a rude or patronizing way, but like in a, yeah, that's not really how this is going to go kind of way.
I'm smiling and laughing in a way, and thinking, and of course you did. That's what I'm thinking.
So I did. Because I wanted to understand it, right? I didn't even want to practice. I just wanted to understand it and be able to share it with other people. It's a classical training, not the more medical training that's popular now. So I did that, and that got me into, got me started with Reiki, got me started with, I don't know, a bunch of different things, got me started with yoga and a variety of things. And then funny, I didn't like being in New York. I didn't, my clients, my big client projects in New York were Wyeth Pharmaceuticals while I'm doing my naturopathic training. Yeah, right. The Chevron Texaco merger and Philip Morris.
In coaching, we would call that a conflict of values.
Precisely. So I would take all this into my meditation. I become a serious yoga person and serious meditator at this stage. These are cornerstones of my life at this point.
What does that look like? Like, are you meditating like 5 hours a day, or like what?
No, but consistently and deeply every single day. And doing yoga. There was a great yoga studio at 23rd and 3rd. Sri Dharma Mitra, who has become famous, but at the time he was just this awesome dude. And I'd be there almost every day, and did all the classes. And Manhattan is amazing like this, right? There's the Open Center and the this center and the that center. There's everything everywhere in Manhattan. It's fabulous. So, I went to all the places, did all the things, studied with all the teachers, everything. So it was a very important part of my life. And I sort of kept asking universe, or whatever you might call it, when can I leave? This is dreadful. I can't do this, right? This is a conflict of values. I can't. And the sense I kept getting, the message I kept getting was, you need to understand this. You need to understand how these companies work from the inside. Okay. So I stuck with it. And then finally, this was hilarious. One day in meditation, I just heard, okay, you can leave now. Okay, you can leave now. And I thought, then suddenly I'm terrified. Like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. I don't have another job. Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? Right? I've been asking for this for, I don't know, 18 months. And now suddenly it feels like the right thing to do. And I'm terrified and I'm not trusting it. So then I run around. I'm like, let me ask this coach. Let me ask this intuitive. Let me ask this astrologer. Let me ask this. Let me ask everybody else. But what was amazing, John, is I couldn't get an appointment with people. Like, we'd set something and then they'd cancel. I was up in DC or down in DC for a meeting and had a call set, and literally the power went out at our office in downtown DC. Like, all the crazies happened, right? Everything happened to interfere with this. And finally it hit me. Oh, I get to trust myself. Oh, I get to trust my own wisdom. I get to trust my own higher knowing. And that was my learning there. So I thought, okay, well, I can leave. And then the next part of the sense was to go to the Ann Wigmore Institute in Puerto Rico. I have to believe I'd heard of it before, but I wasn't aware of having heard of it before.
Well, wait, then how did you hear about it?
I must have heard about it. I don't know, from somebody in Manhattan, I'm sure, right? From someone in the whole alternative world there. I must have. So I thought, well, I looked it up. It's on the beach, and it's a raw food or living food healing center on the beach. I thought, well, that sounds good. Let's do that. I'll take a couple months sabbatical, right? Take 2 or 3 months, go hang out down there, relax, get some sun, and decide what I want to do next. And got there, and of course, then they offered me a job. So I did that and kept consulting. Kept some consulting going. But anyway, so I ended up there for 3 years. During which time I went to India and studied yoga and Ayurveda, and also started my coaching training with CTI. And then decided to go to Washington, right? I thought, executive coaching practice, that's where I'm going with this. Because it's an extension, it's a next stage of what I'd been doing in the consulting world. And I could bring in some of these other things that I'd already integrated. So I thought this will work great. And DC is a great place to do it. I knew folks in DC. I had a consulting gig that I could do part-time. So great. But then that didn't happen at all. People really wanted healing work, not coaching. So I developed a healing practice.
When you say healing, I think some people listening to this are thinking of like, Benny Hinn on TV, at least when I was growing up, and he would like smack people on the forehead and he would heal them, be healed. But what
I wish I could do that. Nope. No. So this was a
what is healing? What does it even mean?
So this was a great mix of things. Like somebody would come and mostly people who came who'd been to 100 different doctors and practitioners and nothing was working, right? Those were the people who ended up calling me. So it was a mix of classical naturopathic work, right? So diet, nutrition, herbs, all that kind of thing. Vibrational work, frequency healing, because I'd gotten into that by then.
What is that?
If you are familiar with Rife and Rife frequencies, that's one application of it. There are others. There's an idea that everything has a frequency.
Okay.
Right? An electrical frequency. And if you either apply a contrary frequency, right, an opposite frequency, in some cases that will cancel out the original one. So if you've got X and minus X, it becomes 0 or whatever. I'm not good at math, so I might have said that wrong, but you get the idea.
I do. And it's an audio concept too. So yeah.
Okay, well, perfect. Okay, so that, right? So it'll cancel the other out. And there's a great deal of empirical evidence of that occurring. Other ways to do that is if the system is quite low or depleted in its own energy, its vibration or frequency, which is not just metaphor, it really is literal. We are electromagnetic beings. Then if you work with the frequency, it will surpass the frequency at which other things can exist or can thrive. So there's an idea that, let's say, I don't want to use the obvious one, I'll get in trouble. So let's say, I don't know, bronchitis or something, tends to live around whatever hertz, right? And the unhealthy body is 3x hertz. Then if you start bringing the system up to that, then this just doesn't fit any longer, right? That condition and those are all, by the way, right? Disease names are just names we've given to a set of experiences. They don't exist within themselves, right? Bronchitis is a name given to if someone has this, registers this, says this, then we call it X, right? So they aren't a thing in and of themselves. They're a name given to a set of experiences. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't diagnose, treat, cure, heal, la, la, la. I'm not a medical doctor. Don't practice any kind of thing, right? I'm not going to get any kind of trouble for any of this. But if you work with frequencies, the system is operating at a place where these other things just don't fit so well any longer. And the same could be true for emotions. The same can be true for states of mind or states of being. So you can work with vibration, with frequency, in ways, and people do this when they work with sound. Like sound healing is an obvious application of frequency and vibration. There are other ways to do it as well, but that's one that a lot of people are familiar with.
So in the bronchitis example, as basically the bronchitis has nowhere for it to live anymore, it just
exactly
it doesn't, it ceases to exist.
It ceases to express.
Oh, ceases to express.
Because it isn't a thing in itself, right? It isn't a single thing. It's an experience.
It's a system, or
it's an experience, right? Because it's like, okay, I have, I don't know, an elevated temperature, and I have a cough, and there's inflammation in the, brachial plexus. It's a combination of things. So if the system, which has innate healing power, right, it knows what its normal and healthful state is, if the conditions are right, it can do an awful lot on its own, right? It will manage that inflammation. It will, if there's a, quote, bug, if you want to, if there's a quote bug, the system can then do something with it, right? It can either sequester it, can kill it, can what have you. So those things The system is able to do what it does on its own. So we don't even have to make the system do anything, right? To me, it feels kind of arrogant to think that we know exactly what needs to be done. But if we can restore the system to its own state of balance, to its vitality, it knows what to do. Not to say that I wouldn't be really excited to go to a hospital if I get hit by a car or something, right? Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not anti-medicine by any stretch,
You've
right?
lost one of
by
your
any.
you've lost one of your arms, and you're just like, let's. No.
I'm not gonna apply frequencies if I've
Right.
lost an arm, or I had a terrible car accident myself one time, and I mean modern medicine saved my life. So there's no, I don't have anything against it. I think it's a spectrum, and when we can keep the body at its fullest and most robust, vital, elevated state, not only is it able to manage a lot of its own healing, the root of which is wholeness, right? The root of that word healing is wholeness. But we are then open to other ways of expressing, right? I'm no longer in survival. Now I'm able to think bigger thoughts. I'm able to reflect on bigger picture ideas. I'm able to put more energy into connecting with whatever we call it, the divine, the all that is, with the luminous, with what have you. So it's part of our bigger picture expression as well. So again, how all of this ties together.
Without obviously breaking confidentiality, but
Sure.
what are some of the most amazing? Maybe you can't, like, there's no good explanation stuff that you've been involved with.
Yeah, there are a lot, and it's interesting because those keep me humble, and they remind me that I'm not the doer in any of this.
Oh, what are you then?
Right? I'm a facilitator. I can be a conduit. I can be a way shower. I can be a knowledge holder, whatever. But I don't do any of this. There's no way I couldn't imagine of it. Right. So a fun one was there was a lady who I'd been connected with. I forget who had referred her. She was in Colorado or something. I was in DC at the time. We're on the phone. Maybe we're on Skype. I think we're on Skype. And she comes about relationship stuff, right? And we've worked together for maybe 75 minutes, maybe 90 minutes. And lots of stuff moved, right? You can feel the energy moving. She's releasing emotion. She's recognizing, patterns that she hadn't been able to quite see before and feeling free of them. And she throws up her arms and says, "Oh my gosh, I feel so free." And then she shrieks. And then I think, "Oh my gosh, what happened?" Right? Something terrible. And she said, my shoulder, it's been frozen for years." Her shoulder unfroze. Why? Because the same things that were holding that relationship pattern in place were holding the shoulder in place. And heaven knows what else, right?
So what? So what are you? Mm-hmm. I'm so curious because so my context for this is I occasionally see someone that does like a combination of mudras to kind of what is my body saying, and then will place her hands in different ways. Like sometimes she'll place her hand like over one hand over my heart and another hand on my back. And all of a sudden, like I'm taking these huge deep breaths. All of a sudden I'm just like, oh, like I'm like so relaxed. And that night I sleep like a baby. And all she did, quote, all she did was put her hands in these different places. So but you're not even meeting with this person in person. You're on the phone. So like, what is going on? And again, I'm putting all this in the context of someone that like was in Russia and doing all this stuff that has nothing to do with, I guess you would call this spirituality or energy. Like, yeah, I'm how do you put all this together?
Well, I mean, I will say I've really reached the point. I used to find them very separate. And I've gotten to a point where I recognize that, or I don't recognize isn't even the right word. I'm now having the experience of everything being one thing. Everything being one thing, that there isn't spiritual and mundane. There isn't, good and bad. There isn't healthy and not. There isn't, like, a lot of the duality stuff falls away, and the idea that something is spiritual and something is not spiritual. And even spiritual is kind of a funky word, right? We've got a lot of baggage on that word. So spiritual is kind of difficult, right? Because a lot of people will react to that. So even that is challenging. I don't have a better word. It's the non-physical, it's the non-apparent, it's the subtle, it's the biofield for the body or what have you. Um, so I think it all comes together because all those things are there. And it's been fun. I work with so many people who are in the business world or who are in the mainstream sphere, and rather accomplished, we'll say, in many cases. And it's the same thing that moves everything, right? It's the motivating, the moving, the energy of creation is the same no matter what, whether we're talking about running a company or running an ashram, whether we're talking about meditating or whether we're talking about walking into a high level meeting. It's the same thing. It's the same creative force expressing in all of it, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, my head's kind of about to explode.
Okay.
Yeah, I get it. I get it on a certain level. On another level, I'm like, oh yeah, this kind of coalesces different things I've been reading and swimming in, and but whoa, yeah.
So then it really isn't even different.
So what are you doing? How? I want to know like, so this person that's working on me, like, what is she doing? I'm almost wanting to say, how is she doing it? But I'm guessing she would have similar answers that you do, which is that she's not doing any. She's not doing something. She's participating,
or she's a conduit. And I mean, of course, I can't speak for her,
right?
But I imagine what she might say, or what I would say if someone asked me what I do when I either am doing something distance or when I used to see people in person, which I still do sometimes. We're participating in a flow of, quote, energy, which even that's not technically the right word, but it's what everybody uses, so we're going to go with it, right? We're participating in a flow of energy, or of, I even think of them as like patterns of light and information, because energy, technically, that's like an engineering term, and it means something specific. But we're participating in that flow of consciousness. We're participating in that flow of creative force, right? And if you might have a nugget of space in your back where something might be tight, a muscle or fascia or something, or you're holding an emotion or you're holding stress or something, then if I'm opening to whatever's wanting to come through, and your system is open to whatever's wanting to change, then that occurs. Right? That occurs. She holds a space.
Mm-hmm.
She's attuned, right? Kind of like a tuning fork, very possibly, not always. But when you say she's holding a mudra, then that would indicate to me that she's probably attuning to something.
In this case, I'm holding. She's putting.
You're doing the mudras.
She's putting my fingers into all these mudras, and then
cool.
Like checking.
Then you're attuning, and she's attuning you.
Yes,
to say she's helping you attune to something.
Yeah, it's this whole idea of like, what are you telling us? What needs to be said here? What? And sometimes I'm like, wow, that's okay. Like, I don't get it. And other times I'm like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yes. Right. Yes. And I mean, that's another way of doing the same kind of thing I've been talking about, which is connecting with someone's higher wisdom and helping them operate from there. So you are getting information. What is your body wanting? What is your system wanting? Right. And then that will come through. It's a particular application of it. You're on a table, your body is relaxed, but also your energy is clear and your mind is clearly relaxed, right? You're in a different brainwave state, et cetera, et cetera. So, but you're saying your wisdom is guiding that, right? You're in the mudras, and you're like, oh, this wants to be said, this wants to be expressed, this wants to be released.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she's helping you tune into your higher awareness and to bring that through in a physical sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in a sense, we call that healing. Is that?
We absolutely do. Yeah.
That's so interesting because I don't think of going to see her to get healed. I think of going there to like something, like so often I'll just be like, something feels really blocked. The more, I mean, since I met you like in 2018, like I've been on this huge journey of making the path from my head down to my heart to even, there's a whole thing around the, people are going to like, whoa, you've lost it, John. The pelvic bowl.
Yeah.
Supposedly that is like, Philip Shepard has a whole thing like that. He thinks that like, that's where the deepest intelligence of the body, the cell, and now we're really getting out there. But so more and more yes, I will just, things will just feel blocked or janky or whatever. And I don't go see her on a regular basis, but I'll just be like, there's like this fist-shaped thing in my heart or and I went to go see her because I was having this like really kind of serious health stuff that nobody could understand where it came from or what was going on. And I was reading The Body Keeps the Score. And it's like stored trauma. I don't think I have any trauma. I had a quote normal childhood. Not that anyone does. And I met with this one person and they're like, you should just meet with someone in person that could maybe like feel into your body and see what's going on. And so I met with her. And what was so funny was I had started coaching and I could feel, I started listening from my heart instead of my head. Mm-hmm. And so I had like this like 1 foot space between like my chin and my heart that I was like listening from. And I was like, whoa, I would go to the airport after my coaching training. And like, I was like just sending people love and feeling all this stuff. Like, whoa, what is going on? Well, when I started meeting with this lady, people in the, like in coaching class would drive me crazy. People like, where do you feel this in your body? And they'd be like, oh, I'm feeling something in my knee or feel your toes. And I'm like, I couldn't feel any of that. Nothing. So I went and saw this lady the first time, and all of a sudden I was like, I can feel the tops of my legs, like sitting here right in this moment. I can feel the tops of my legs. So then I went back. I'm like, can you do some more stuff so I can like feel my feet? She's like, well, yes, of course. So we worked our way all the way down to my toes. And then Beautiful. I was like, okay, now there's something like to the top of my neck, bottom of my neck from up there. And now it's become this kind of more and more evolved thing of, yeah, like I was saying, I feel something is stuck or something. And she'll be like, all right, well, let's just see what your body's telling us today. And then she does her thing and she'll be like, okay, so there's a lot of anger. Does this making sense? I'm like, no, not really. And then she'll do some more like, how about this? And I'm like, okay, now, yes. And then she'll do her thing. And like I say, I lay there and all of a sudden I'm just super relaxed and I fall asleep. I do these huge exhales. I don't know what's good. So anyway, I don't think of it as healing, but I guess in a way it is.
I mean, healing is a difficult term. It could mean an awful lot of different things. And if you're accustomed to thinking of it in a medical sense, then it wouldn't feel so right? But if you're looking at it from restoring wholeness to the system,
it's totally doing that. Yes.
Then it's exactly what's like. It's actually a perfect example.
So what's next for you? What's the next thing that you're interested in, or because I'm guessing that if this is how it's unfolded, you're not like, well, I'm going to retire now.
No, I'm very interested in studying. This all sounds so preposterous, even just to speak it. There's the study of human consciousness, but the applied study, the experience of continued growth and evolution in consciousness is very interesting to me for a number of reasons. I mean, there's tremendous healing potential in it for people. There is, I'm speaking things that I've only thought in my own head. I haven't ever actually put into actual words. So, so I'm a little apprehensive. I'm feeling a little guarded. There's also, I think, importance societally to people accessing, I mean, you can say higher states of consciousness. You can also say deeper states of consciousness, right? You can look at it either way. But I think I think it's very important and very valuable. I think there's tremendous potential in it individually and collectively. And I think there's a readiness now among large numbers of people to look at things beyond, just the physical table and the physical, pen or what have you, and to understand that emotions are very powerful, to understand that there are collective ideas and emotions and waves that are also very powerful, and it feeds in both ways, right? Those things external to me affect my system. My system affects what's external to me. And it goes on and on. And if we can change where we are coming from, then we change what we're putting out. We change what's getting created, et cetera, right? It is, I think, a strong leverage point. My goal has always been like, where can I get the greatest leverage in my work with people? Which is how I got into the energy in the first place, because naturopathic stuff seems slow. And I don't like slow. Like, let's go, let's get it done, let's move. And so this feels like a point of great leverage. And I've been involved with a researcher. His name is Jeffrey A. Martin, and he's an extraordinary person. And I've followed his work and been involved with some of his stuff the past few years, and had my own experiences of the very different perspectives, the very different realities that can be depending on where we are in awareness or in consciousness. I know this is starting to sound really weird.
Can you define that actually? When you say consciousness, like what? I think everyone has a different, like, what does that mean?
Right? So if we think about it in terms, let me think about this for a second. Awareness might almost be a better word, but I think he uses consciousness. He's actually created a map from studies that he's done all around the world of locations in consciousness, which basically is, where am I coming from, right? What state am I, from what state am I seeing the world? It's not the same as like a spiral dynamics or Ken Wilber's integral work, but it's also not totally different. Right, where we experience and are at and move through different stages of maturity, if you will, in consciousness, or of expression in consciousness.
And when you say coming from, because I'm very much a layman and all this stuff, I think of, am I coming from a place of love? I'm going to have a different outcome.
Absolutely.
Someone doesn't do what I think they should do at the store. If I'm coming from a place of anger, resentment, I'm going to be coming from, if I come from that energy, I'm going to have a certain interaction.
Yes.
If I come from a place of love, acceptance, something else, is that what we're talking about?
So yes, and okay. So we're talking about that for sure, right? For sure. And there's also, like if you look at spiral dynamics where, there's sort of there's a level where I tend to be very self-focused. There's a level where I tend to be a little more broadly focused. Another level, and levels are difficult because they aren't, they aren't clearly defined boxes or anything like that. They're very fluid, but we don't have a better word, or I don't have a better word anyway, than levels at this stage. So there's a level where, our awareness expands, or our consciousness expands to really hold, people and all the animals around us, right? Where it expands to hold all that is, where it expands to hold, where there's not even a self from which to really look anymore, right? Okay. So we're talking at the level of, am I responding with anger? Am I responding with love? And we're also at the level also talking about these stages of where am I in this broader picture?
Okay, now my head's about to explode again. It's so good.
So I find all of this really fascinating, and I find the applications of it very, very valuable, because if I'm operating a business, so to speak, or if I'm operating a family, or if I'm operating anything, my car. but really, I mean, if you're thinking about a business, a country, right? A city, an organization, a collective of some sort, then where that is coming from makes a huge difference, both in how it expresses and how it engages with everything else, how it relates with everything else. So I think there's great. I mean, I'm working at a very small scale. He's doing things at a much higher level and much, he's out in academia doing all this. And I'm, sitting at my little practice, working with my dozens of clients or whatever, and thinking, how do we apply this in a way that makes the greatest difference for the organizations and families and lives and spiritual paths that people are running and expressing in. And also really feeling, I mean, I remember in my coaching training way back, I don't know, 2005 or something, we were told to, like, what's your purpose or mission statement or whatever like that, right? That we had to do. And I still remember mine, which is remarkable because I don't remember anything that happened in the past really. But I was like, I'm the spark that like shocks the world alive or something like that. And it was really, but that's consciousness, right? That's awakening ourselves to a higher knowing, to our higher way of being, out of the like, okay, this is my house and here's my job and here's my table and here's my car and here's my children and here's my whatever, to that there's more, not more in the sense of like, ooh, more stuff, but more awareness, more possibility, more potential, more connection, more, things that we don't even have great words for at this stage. And if I'm operating from that place, my business decisions will be different, right? The choices I make when I'm at the grocery store and somebody, does something, or someone cuts me off in traffic, my choices are different then and more generative, right? The more aware I am, the more expanded I am, my choices are more generative versus more constrictive.
Wow, there's lots here to ponder and be with. So if people wanted to be with you or be in contact with you, what's the best way that they could do that?
So the best way to do that, I am in the process of putting a new website up. Mine got hacked and taken down. And so now I'm putting up a new one, which I think was just a little signal saying, come on, take down that website from 10 years ago. That's ancient history. Let's do something new. But I do have a contact form at katherinekrupka.com. And you can contact me that way. And yeah, through email, which is also accessible there through the baby site that's there at the moment while I put something proper up.
Any last thoughts, challenges, encouragements, anything you want to leave people with?
Yeah, we're in some wild times and things feel crazy and things feel charged and things feel electric and heavy and dense and scary, actually, scary even. I think probably everyone is experiencing some level of consistent low-level trauma response in the nervous system. And to be really aware that your system is probably a little frazzled and that you are a little, on edge or in a hypervigilant or sort of chronically aroused state, nervous system wise. And I think if we know that and we just acknowledge that, it makes it easier for us to be gentle with ourselves, to be compassionate with others, the person at the grocery, like you said, or whatever it might be, or even on a bigger scale, right? All the wow going on much bigger scales, to hold in compassion as well as in discernment, both, right? Both can be, I can do both. I can hold in compassion and hold discernment at the same time. And to hold compassion for oneself, right? And to do the things that will keep you centered, to allow you to drop deeper into your own system, into your own wisdom, into that inner knowing that everybody has. I help people access it and get, crystal clear connections to it and everything like that, but we all have it. It doesn't belong. It's not restricted to certain people or anything like that. It's there for everybody, and it's always there.
Thanks for listening to The John Polster Show. Notes, links, and all that other good stuff for this episode are at johnpolster.com/podcast. Send your questions, ideas, or a simple hello to podcast@johnpolster.com. Want to stay up to date on new episodes and receive notifications of upcoming events? Register your email address at johnpolster.com/updates.